Breaking news this evening is the identity of the man who sent the Obama administration into defend and explain mode this week.
The president is allowing Edward Snowden, a traitor, to pull the puppet strings. This man is a traitor to our country. He's been indicted for espionage in time of war.
I don't think Mr. Snowden was a patriot. As I said in my opening remarks, I called for a thorough review of our surveillance operations before Mr. Snowden made these leaks.
Breaking details on that whistleblower who leaked top secret documents about the government surveillance of Americans. Edward Snowden revealed his identity to The Guardian. He knows he's a hunted man right now. He's trying to find a country that will give him asylum from prosecution.
Imagine that you worked at the CIA. You followed the rules your whole life. I had never been drunk. I had never smoked a joint, right? I was a square. My family worked for the government. I was going to work for the government. So you come from a certain kind of background. You're a certain kind of guy. You're not that exciting, but you believe in the importance of rules. And on the first day you work at the CIA, you have to take what they call an oath of service. It's a very solemn vow in a dark room, flags all over the place, with everybody else that's entering government service at the same day. And here you have to swear an oath to support and defend not the agency, not a secret, not even a president, but the Constitution of your country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, fast forward many, many years, after you've signed something else, what's called Standard Form 312, a classified non-disclosure agreement. It means you won't talk to reporters. And many years later, you find that what you are doing, what everyone at your agency is doing, is a gigantic conspiracy to violate precisely that oath you took on the very first day. And this is what I struggled with for many years and eventually drove me forward, is what do you do when you have contradicting obligations? To what do we owe our greater loyalty? To the founding documents of our society, to the Constitution, or to Standard Form 312? For myself, the answer was clear. And when the government can act behind closed doors, when they can change the game without our knowledge and consent, I believe the public has a right to know about that. There's two large ones. One is technological and one is democratic. When we talk about technology, the primary distinction, the thing that drove me forward, the thing that chilled me, is that intelligence collection and surveillance more broadly was happening in an entirely different way. It was no longer the targeted surveillance of the past, where the police or spies went, we have this person that we suspect is up to no good. And so we're going to sneak into their home or their office. We're going to plant a bug. We're going to go to the phone company and we're going to tap their specific line. We're going to listen to a link that they talk to bad guys with. Instead, they began watching everyone, everywhere, all the time, saving as much information as they could, even for people who had done nothing wrong, even for people who were not suspected of doing something wrong, simply because it could eventually be useful, or maybe they wouldn't get a chance to catch it later, so they would prospectively begin surveilling people before they had broken the law. This is what I call the creation of the new permanent record. Systems were being created that did this all the time in the background, and nobody in a position of power tried to stop it because it benefited them. And this is what brings us to the democratic problem. The law didn't matter. The courts didn't matter. Your rights didn't matter because the system had redefined and compromised them and what they meant in absolute secrecy. And this leaves us with the question that I think we are still dealing with today. What do you do when the most powerful institutions in society have become the least accountable to society? And I think that's the question that our generation exists to answer. And this is really the subject of the memoir that I just wrote, that the day I published it, the CIA and NSA sued to try to keep people from reading because they don't like books like this being written. I feel, looking 6 years on, that the world is changing and we are at a point of primary vulnerability. But I think as much as we see the anger rising, as much as I think we see awareness of problems beginning to develop, people are quite frequently mad at the right people for the wrong reasons, as they see this increasing predation on all of us publicly through these systems, whether we're talking governmental or corporate. Yes, these people are engaged in abuse, particularly when you look at a Google, an Amazon, a Facebook. But their business model is abuse. And yet every bit of it, they argue, is legal. And whether we're talking about Facebook or the NSA, that is the problem. That's the real problem. We have legalized the abuse of the person through the personal. We have entrenched a system that makes the population vulnerable for the benefit of the privileged. I think what we saw for each of those companies in their own ways, I don't think it was a collaborated decision across the industry, was an entrance into a Faustian bargain. They had made the deal with the devil, as it were, where they went in this way, in this particular circumstance, we are going to construct a data sharing method for us to go beyond what the law requires to do this government a favor, because we believe this government is a positive force for the world. And I think we can all understand and appreciate where that initial drive comes from. You want to believe the government is going to have the tools they need to investigate serious crimes, to prevent acts of terrorism. But when we look at what these programs actually were used for, and what the results of them were over many, many years, we saw that tools that had been intended to protect the public had been in many ways used to attack the public. But the government's not going to tell these companies why, in many cases, they need this information. They're simply going to try to create those methods of exchange, those systems of information sharing, as they call it. And ultimately, what they're doing is they're deputizing these companies to act in what are increasingly quasi-governmental roles, deciding what can and cannot be said on the internet, deciding what can and cannot be shared, and ultimately turning over perfect records of private lives on demand to institutions that are no longer meaningfully accountable to the public at large. Technology is largely value neutral. It is an amplification of individual power. But what is an institution than the accumulation of individual power put toward a single purpose? When we have new technologies that are being used by small companies, by non-governmental organizations, by human rights defenders and activists, to try to empower the public broadly and protect them from threats and vulnerabilities, we start moving in the direction of a safer and freer world. When we see governments and corporations working in concert, we begin to see the birth of a complex between the two, where neither truly acts independently or adversarially, but rather they become the left and the right hand of the same body. What we see is the concentration of power. Now, when we have an institution or institutions which were already powerful before, and now they are combining their powers to control or at least influence what everybody who is outside of those institutions are able to do, that I think raises real questions of, is the ultimate benefit worth the cost? Because if you create an irresistible power, whether it's held by Facebook or whether it's held by any government, the question is, how will you police the expression of that power when it is used against the public rather than for it? This is a good bit of legislation in terms of the effort that they're trying to do. Is GDPR the correct solution? I think no, and I think the mistake that it makes is actually in the name. The General Data Protection Regulation misplaces the problem. The problem isn't data protection, the problem is data collection. Regulating the protection of data presumes that the collection of data in the first place was proper, that it was appropriate, that it doesn't represent a threat or a danger, that it's okay to spy on everybody all the time, whether they're your customers or whether they're your citizens, so long as it never leaks.